καλωσορίσω όλους στο Οικονομικό Φόρουμ των Δελφών. Σήμερα εδώ θα μιλήσουμε για την αρχιτεκτονική ασφάλεια της Μαύρης Θάλασσας με ειδικούς από διάφορα ιδρύματα και Ινστιτούτα σε όλο τον κόσμο. Well, I'm changing to English so that you can understand me, of course. I just said that we are going to discuss the security architecture in the Black Sea, which was destroyed, I can say, by the full-scale aggression, the war of Russia against Ukraine. So we're going to talk about how this completely, when the security was destroyed there, how we are going to manage to put it back, how we're going to manage to maintain security in the Black Sea when the war is going on, and we don't see it ending in the foreseeable future because we don't see Russians moving out of Ukraine, which is what the international community and the West wants. So I'm going to welcome Melvin. He is a director in the Royal United Services Institute. Hi, Neil. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Lazăr Comănescu, he's the ambassador, he's Secretary General at the Black Sea Economic Cooperation. Good afternoon, Ambassador. Natia Seskuria, she's founder, executive director in the Regional Institute for Security Studies. Hi, Natia. And Maryna Vorotnyuk, she's associate fellow also at RUSI Institute. Hi, Maryna. And now I want to start this discussion with Neil. Neil, how do you see that we can preserve security in the Black Sea with the war going on and seeing how the aggression of Russia is continuing?
No, thank you very much, and I'd like to congratulate the Forum on selecting this topic. I think it's really one of the key strategic challenges that Europe is facing today. And indeed, I know there's actually a second panel on this topic with perhaps an even more exciting title of Battle for the Black Sea. But the reason I think we're talking about securing the Black Sea is because fundamentally the challenge is how to actually create a framework of deterrence and defense that can contain Russia. So that to me is the strategic challenge that we face. And if we look at what's happening, of course, much of the focus at the moment is on the Ukraine war, and rightly, it's entering a crucial phase, which may well determine the outcome of that, and almost all efforts are going into that. But we're already beginning to see a wider discussion emerging about how Ukraine can be protected in the future. We'll see that at the Vilnius summit, where there is a discussion about security assurances, security guarantees, and this is, I think, important because signaling to Russia about today's war is also showing that there is a long-term commitment to defend Ukraine going forward. But why then do we need to bring in the region into this conflict? Is it not just a Russia-Ukraine conflict? Well, I think the fundamental reason is because actually the Ukraine war is part of Russia's regional strategy. It's not an isolated event. It's something that we've seen develop over the last 20 years in a step-by-step way, beginning with the securing of the North Caucasus by Russian Federation forces as a sort of military base, and then spreading out across the region, securing security partnerships in the South Caucasus, the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, of course, the presence in Moldova, the long-term presence in Moldova, the building up of a naval force, the Black Sea Fleet, the 2014 war against Ukraine and the taking of Crimea, which actually was a regional initiative, because by seizing Crimea, Russia seized control of much of the northern part of the Black Sea region.
Well, which we ignored for many years.
Exactly. So Russia hasn't formalized this. There's not a single document, but there is very clearly a strategy. And this, of course, has also allowed Russia to actually project power beyond the Black Sea. So control of Crimea and the Black Sea is part of a much broader strategy. So this actually providing security and defense to Ukraine requires that we address the regional dimensions. And Russia has, what it's done, it's actually fragmented the region through these policies. It's broken up the region through its domination of the Black Sea. So just two points I think that we need to think about here. First of all, we need to have a strategy that is fundamentally maritime-based. It's about trying to put the region back together in a maritime sense, and Ukraine has to be at the core of that, together with other regional partners. We need to have a comprehensive approach to Ukraine, which looks at not just hard defense, but the industrial policy, resilience, its relationship to NATO, and all kinds of other softer aspects such as energy security. So there needs to be a comprehensive defense and deterrence framework around Russia. And then lastly, I think we then need to think about how that fits together. How can we actually begin to build a security community in the Black Sea when we're going to have this quite complicated, as you said, architectural question. Some NATO member states, some pro-NATO countries, some countries that are not necessarily well-oriented towards NATO, may even be allies of Russia, and of course Russia itself. So I think we're looking at some sort of variable geometry, sort of multi-minilateralism, if you like.
Thank you very much, Neil. I want to welcome also Mustafa Aydin. He's president of the International Relations Council. Good evening, good afternoon, Mustafa. And now, Maryna, I want to ask you, you are based in London, but you are from Ukraine. How do you see the thing in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and the security issue in the Black Sea evolving? And we see now that there may be also a problem with the grain agreement. And how do you see that, the next day of that evolving? I mean, also with the grain.
Thank you very much, Odin, and it's a pleasure to be here. And following Neil's introduction of the general outline of security, or rather insecurity in the Black Sea, let me focus on the main source of insecurity, which is Russia's war against Ukraine. And the topic of the panel is securing the Black Sea. And I would argue that in order to secure the Black Sea, we need to make Ukraine prevail. We need to make Ukraine win. So for years, we have been characterizing the Black Sea as a fractured security space, as a contested security space. And now it's even more serious. It's not simply fractured, it's Russia monopolized, it's Russia dominated. A popular argument these days is that Russia is seemingly a decline in power in the region, and that Russia's security clout in the region is diminishing, with other actors rushing in, like China or Turkey. I partially agree with this argument, but I think that we still need to bear in mind that Russia still maintains significant spoiler abilities in the region, has lots of built-in advantages here, which, coupled with the lack of the Western coherent strategy in the region, means that Russia still, we need to brace to the reality that Russia remains a serious, a strong disruptive force in the region. So this has been my general observation, and let me make now 5 points, elements that I think we need to consider at the moment. Firstly, making Ukraine win the war. I think the most often repeated formula these days we hear is that West will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And it's good, but I think that we need to make sure that it does not take long, that Ukraine wins sooner rather than later. And that means that we need to provide Ukraine with all types of weapons that it requests, like air defense, longer type munition, and modern air jets. West has been crucial in helping Ukraine resist, and it gave Ukraine a fighting chance, but I think more needs to be done. Secondly, our Russia strategy, and by extension our Black Sea strategy. I think that we clearly see that there were serious shortcomings or even failures in our Russia strategy, and this needs to be remedied. And we need to make sure that costs for Russia to continue this war or become prohibitively high, because they are still not, I would argue. And here I'm alluding to the existing loopholes in the sanctions implementation, among others. Next, clear vision of what Russia's defeat and Ukraine's victory is. I think we still don't have a unified vision on that. When we argue that we need to deliver Russia's strategic defeat, what exactly do we mean by that? So I've seen a wide spectrum of narratives here, from the narrative that it's up to Ukrainians to decide where they stop on the battlefield, to the narrative that if we supply the weapons, then it's up to us to attach the strings, how those weapons and where those weapons are going to be used. Then the narrative that Crimea is some sort of a special case as compared to Donbass, or even the narrative I've heard last year with the Ukraine's successful counteroffensive, that Ukraine, it's risky because Ukraine can get emboldened by its successful counteroffensive. So I think that the main problem is, in short, is that West still largely exercises self-deterrence here and was very oversensitive to make Kremlin aware of where its red lines in Ukraine are, what West won't be doing in Ukraine. Fourthly, ceasefire and peace. I think we've seen lots of discussions about that. And I think that in order to secure the Black Sea, we need a sustainable and just peace in the region. And we don't need peace or ceasefire on Russian terms. And I think it's important to prevent this scenario when Ukraine is under international pressure, citing Ukraine's best interests in mind, that you need the breathing space and so you need a ceasefire. The ones of you who follow Ukrainian internal discourse, you know very well, you've seen the polls that Ukrainians are prepared to fight till the end. They say we don't need breathing space, we don't need ceasefire on Russian terms, we need weapons. So acknowledging that basically there is only military solution to this war is probably a tough choice for us, because the political solution needs to come first. But I think at the moment we see that the political solutions have been exhausted. We've tried to engage Russia, but we failed. So the question is, I'm often asked whether Kremlin was deterrable at all. It's unclear. I mean, could the war have been prevented? We don't know, but what is clear that deterrence failed. And lastly, I think that, we even talking at this very forum, talking about post-Putin Russia, for instance, we still operate with the assumption that Russia is to remain a strategic adversary to the West in the foreseeable future. But let me finish on a positive note. I think that we can be talking about this war, or rather the outcomes of this war, as being a potential catalyst of a more secure and just regional order in the Black Sea. And Ukraine potentially becoming the insulator. By investing in Ukraine, we invest in the security in the Black Sea. And I think, to the surprise of many, Ukraine appeared to be not a failing state. It's a capable, emerging, consolidated nation, carrying out the reforms already as a EU candidate state. It's a capable military force. It's a pivot for Euro-Atlantic strategic interests here in the Eastern Europe. So it's emerging as a very significant, conduit for Western interests in the Black Sea, which can counterbalance this current situation, which I would characterize as a exclusively Russian, or let's say Russia-Turkish condominium in the region. So the last sentence is that I think ensuring that Ukraine succeeds and prevails is a recipe to the regional security and by extension to the global security. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maryna. And now, Ambassador Comănescu, do you see that economic cooperation in the Black Sea can continue and now through the war? And what role may ship owners or civil society even play in that, and not only geopolitics?
Well, first of all, thank you very much and the organizers for having given me the opportunity to be with you today. And I also feel that the organizers of this forum, of the Delphi Economic Forum, deserves to be credited and congratulated for having allocated, if I'm not mistaken, 2 panels to the Black Sea region. That speaks about the awareness of the importance in a strategic way, in a security way, in geopolitical way of this region. And well, I was wondering myself, and I'm now speaking in front of you, whether one would have needed to wait for a conflict, unfortunate development in this region of the conflict and the war in Ukraine, to see how important this region is. Not just for the countries in the area, but for much, much, much more beyond. And that brings me to 2 more comments. First of all, yes, debating upon the security in the Black Sea area, particularly under the current circumstances, is not only a necessity, but it is also a matter of urgency. This is point number one. Point number two, while fully understanding how important, and here I'm come close to your question to me, while of course fully understanding, and we've seen that the debate so far around the Black Sea has been mainly focused on the, let's say, the hard dimension of security. It's fully understandable. But if we look into the future, not just the present, near future, medium future, long-term future, we should not ignore that there is an extremely important, first of all, that security is a multidimensional concept. And there is an extremely important economic dimension of security. And here is where the organization which I have the honor to represent today, but I want to be very clear that I'm speaking on my personal views. So, and here, as I may be a little bit subjective to say that to stress the importance of the economic dimension, but nevertheless, in all modesty, I think that it should be given an increased attention. And why? Because, well, history shows clearly to us that where economic development, economic cooperation increased, security by itself has been strengthened. And that was actually the rationale when the founders of this organization, of the VIII, thought to set up the Black Sea Economic Organization. So, and let's not forget one thing, that when talking about economic development and cooperation, cooperation doesn't mean eliminating or forbidding competition. No, competition, as long as it is a fair competition, that is an engine for progress. It's only becoming something else when it's looked at as a tool for, I don't know, domination, control, and so on. When we look at the situation as of now, definitely the atmosphere which led to the establishment of the organization is not anymore there. The economy of our countries and beyond the region have been affected. Don't need to elaborate that much about food security and so on, about energy, transport, infrastructure, and so on. But it doesn't mean that we should not make any further effort in order to, let's say, to keep in mind that working on the economic dimension of security is a necessity. And this is what we have been trying. And the fact itself, to do it in the current circumstances, the fact itself that in spite of the war, we, after, well, almost 1 year of putting things on hold in the organization, we've been able to resume our activities almost in full. And the important thing is that all the 13 member states now are coming back and around the same table. Of course, keeping, we understand adversities in an atmosphere of conflict cannot be avoided. But I think that the mere fact that people are around the same table, talking about important economic dimensions, such as, for example, today we've started working on the updating of the basic economic agenda, which inter alia provides for also looking into how to find ways, identify ways to continue to work towards economic cooperation while taking into account risks like those which we've been witnessing and facing these days. And so this is something which I think that deserves to be kept in mind. And as a permanent secretariat of this organization, have been working for that. And for that, of course, we are not naive. We are not naive, but there are, even under the current circumstances, there are areas and projects which can be implemented And by the way, the cooperation within the BISEC organization doesn't mean that everything has to be to the benefit of the participation of everybody there. No, there are projects where if some member states of the BISEC agree to go on, they can go on. And it's an important element which you have to take into account. And final point, which I want to stress, even in the most adversarial atmosphere and relationship, if we can talk about, I think that it deserves to make efforts to keep, albeit very narrow, but to keep doors open for the dialogue. I was wondering whether, if this was not the case, the highly appreciated grain agreement would have been reached at 1 year ago. This is just one example that even in the direst situations, we should not forget and we should seek ways for dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I want, Mustafa, I want to go to you because I don't think we can restore or have security in the Black Sea without Turkey. I think Turkey is a protagonist in this case. Well, in many cases actually, but in this case also. How do you think that Turkey will continue to play a protagonist role in the region and with the relations, the good relations that it has with Russia, and maybe now after the election, better relations with the West and with the United States also? Will that play a huge role?
Okay, thank you. I'll come to answer that to the last. And let me start with saying that let us accept Black Sea is a contested neighborhood. This is an important acceptance because for years, both insiders, the regional countries, and outsiders didn't thought so. Especially the countries in the region thought that there was a possibility of cooperation within the region. BISEC spearheaded the movement, but also there were other regional initiatives to create a security environment, regional security environment, in a sense to contain Russia in multilateral forum. But the recent, not only the last invasion of Ukraine, but also the Russian behavior since 2008 have shown that these regional initiatives have failed to create a regional security environment. So that's the first thing that we have to recognize and understand if we are going to address the security problems in the Black Sea. And I think the Black Sea transition will continue for some time, and there is no end for it. And let me remind you, it's not only the regional countries that have failed to create security, provide security for the region, but also outsiders, both institutions and the states, including the NATO, European Union, OSCE, and any other institution that comes to mind, and the countries have also failed to provide security for the Black Sea for decades now. And one of the problems in the, let me emphasize also, none of the problems emerged in the Black Sea since the end of the Cold War. Not only the Russian aggression, but all the other problems we've been talking over the years have been solved. So any new problem piles on the old ones, and that includes the recent Russian aggression. And also, let me remind you that one of the continuous problem and one of the more important issues apart from the Russian aggression has been this so-called frozen conflicts. It's not only Ukraine that we have continuous conflicts in the Black Sea region. The Caucasus has just recently shown a flare-up of one of those frozen conflicts. So unless we are going to address all these problems, detaining Russia or containing Russia in Ukraine will not be enough if we are looking to the longer term. Looking to the future, obviously there will be more competition and conflict rather than cooperation in the Black Sea. From the security perspective, obviously, the western and southern shores of Black Sea is now firmly within NATO area. However, northern and eastern parts of Black Sea are still in limbo. So we have to address all these regions, not only Ukraine. One more issue before looking to the future, we should not forget that Black Sea is not a Black Sea anymore. Black Sea and the Mediterranean are one unit of analysis as far as Russia is concerned. Because the Russian operations in the Middle East, in Syria, in Eastern Mediterranean, in Libya, were supported logistically by its Black Sea fleet. Now they are stranded in the Black Sea because of the application of Montreux Convention by Turkey, but in the eventuality of solution of the war situation, then the straits will be opening and Russia would resuming its positions in the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So we shouldn't be forgetting that. But one couple of things that this current war has shown, one is that Russia cannot challenge NATO in a conventional warfare. We should not forget that. Sometimes within NATO, when we are discussing, we are too much emphasizing on the critics and too much emphasizing on the threats and perceptions of threats, etc. But the war in Ukraine has shown that Russia is not capable challenging NATO in a conventional warfare. Let's keep that in mind. They failed conventionally in Ukraine, let alone any NATO country. The second is, it also showed that NATO was not ready for a sudden challenge in its neighborhood. The war in Ukraine also showed us that. Even though Russia is not able to challenge NATO, NATO was not ready for any kind of a challenge. Now it is more or less ready. There is a high readiness force activated. The command is in Turkey, in Istanbul now, during the 2023. And it could be activated within 20 days, 120,000 soldiers immediately to defend territorial defense of NATO countries. So we should not be excessively critical of ourselves in NATO. Regarding Turkey's interesting, let me put it that way, interesting position between Ukraine, Russia and the West. Obviously, Turkey doesn't want to emphasize and highlight its aids to Ukraine. But this doesn't mean that we should be ignoring it. So let me just remind you what has been Turkey is doing. First of all, from the Western perspective, on the negative side, Turkey has not complied with Western sanctions on Russia. That's obvious. But it has, of course, implemented the grain deal, and it has tried to create the connections between Russia and Ukraine. So let's put that on the one side. On the military aspect, first of all, Turkey closed the straits on February 27, declaring that there was a war in Ukraine before any other country did so. So closing the straits, according to Montreux Convention, was only possible when we declared that it was a war going on in the vicinity. So that was the first thing. And closing the straits is not an easy option, and it's never easy, because this has been control of the strait has been an issue for international politics since the late 17th century. So closing the straits to any ship is always problematic. And let me remind you one more thing that publics usually do not know. Turkey did not only close the straits for warring countries, but it also asked all the other countries not to send warships into the Black Sea. And also, Turkey also asked Russia not to bring its Black Sea fleet forces that was stranded outside Black Sea into the Black Sea once the strait was closed. Actually, Russia had right to bring back all its Black Sea fleet to the Black Sea, but Turkey asked Russia not to do it. And according to the latest estimates, there are about between 20 and 30 Russian surface ships outside the Black Sea belonging to the Black Sea fleet, and plus 2 Kilo-class submarines. So after sinking of Moscow, you can imagine how important for Russia to bring all these ships to the Black Sea, but it's not able to do it. So this is actually stranding and, in a sense, creating an environment of hostage for the Black Sea fleet of Russia in the region. Secondly, Turkey has been supplying, as many knows, drones to Ukraine, but beyond the drones, there have been armored personal vehicles, ammunition, US-designed clusters munitions, which is not confirmed, military gear, multiple rocket launchers, And more importantly, Turkey has been contracted to build 4 corvettes to Ukraine, one of which is already completed, the second one is being built. So looking from this perspective, I don't think that Turkey is a neutral country in this war. And finally, Turkey has assumed NATO command, spearheading the NATO warfighting corps for the 23. This means that if there is an attack from Russia on any NATO country, Turkey will be assuming the command of the first response against Russia. And finally, Turkey has been maintaining constantly 1 submarine, 1 surface ship, and 1 patrol aircraft 24 hours, 7 days in the Black Sea, providing 67% of what NATO call situational awareness in the Black Sea. So without Turkish participation and contribution to NATO defense in the region, there is no NATO defense in the Black Sea. So when we are talking about Turkish ambivalent position in the war between Ukraine and Russia, we should keep in mind what's really happening on the ground. But these are the issues and aspects that Turkish government do not want to advertise in an attempt to keep Russia on way and also benefiting from the situation, admittedly.
Thank you very much. And now, Natia, what do you believe, how can the West secure the Black Sea and protect countries like Georgia? And I'm asking you that because you come from Georgia, and some people say that maybe Georgia will be the next Ukraine. So, in your opinion, what can the West do?
Thank you, Odin, and thanks very much to Delphi Economic Forum for this opportunity. Like my co-panelists mentioned, I was very pleased to see 2 panels dedicated to the Black Sea security, which I think is very important at the time when the Black Sea is and has been for a while the stage of major confrontation and competition between Russia and the West. Russia's war against Ukraine, I think, is raising fundamental questions and is shifting Black Sea security framework fundamentally, as the Black Sea coast represents the front line of the defense for Euro-Atlantic community. And I think the full-scale war in Ukraine demonstrates that whatever happens in the Black Sea does not simply stay in the Black Sea. So that is why it is so important to make sure that Ukraine's victory is ensured in this war, because it will have fundamental impact on the way in which things will develop and evolve in the Black Sea. It also demonstrates that Moscow's goals were much more ambitious when Moscow invaded Georgia in 2008 and annexed Crimea and waged war in eastern Ukraine in 2014. This unfortunately has only been acknowledged now, and I very much align with Maryna's points on the necessity to develop a coherent Russia strategy as well as the Black Sea strategy finally, when there is a certain agreement and acknowledgement for now that it is fundamental not only for the Black Sea security but for the entire European security to ensure that Russia does not continue its aggressive actions towards the littoral countries of the Black Sea. The 2008 war against Georgia was, I think, the first significant shift that was demonstrating that Moscow's policies towards Black Sea was aimed at further militarization and putting further pressure on the countries such as Ukraine and Georgia that were dedicated to the pro-NATO, pro-European agenda. And as of today, roughly 2/3 of Georgia's Black Sea coast is is cut off, basically, due to the occupation of Abkhazia, and Russia still continues to put pressure on Georgia through various means such as disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure. And when we are talking about Georgia becoming next Ukraine, we have to acknowledge the fact that Georgia has already been been under occupation since 2008 and is constantly under pressure. Russia does not have to drive tanks into Tbilisi to achieve its aims. And for now, we see the constant attempts from Moscow to put extreme pressure on Georgia through unconventional means to achieve the goals and aims that they have. And primarily, the main concern that Russia has in this region with regards to, let's say, Western-facing countries is to make sure that there is no external powers have influence in the Black Sea. And mainly, I'm of course highlighting NATO and the US here. The protracted conflicts and the lack of security guarantees for Georgia have enabled Russia to intimidate Georgia continuously. And the 2008 war, I think, already indicated that Russia's aim was the further militarization. And we have seen that Russia has been able to gain more leverage as a result of 2014 when they managed to annex Crimea. But unfortunately, I think what was lacking in the Western strategy towards the Black Sea and towards containing Russia was the acknowledgement that Putin's ambitions were much more far-reaching. And this has only been acknowledged last year when the full-scale war against Ukraine has been waged. And this places the West in a position where it is of utmost importance to make sure that there is a coherent strategy in place, because the war in Ukraine, the outcome of the war in Ukraine will, I think, fundamentally determine what kind of Russia other countries in the Black Sea will be facing. And in this sense, of course, countries like Georgia, Moldova, also South Caucasus generally, is the level of insecurity is much higher as of today. And currently the prospect of stability in the Black Sea region remains very much uncertain and very much interlinked to the outcome of the war in Ukraine. I think contemporary Russian strategic thinking views the Black Sea as a central part of Moscow's geopolitical interests. That's why we will be seeing Russia still, of course, given the capabilities that they will have following the war in Ukraine, they will still be attempting, unless Russia is defeated fully in Ukraine, they will still be attempting to put pressure on the countries, on the littoral states. And I think for now, the fearless fight of the Ukrainians, in conjunction, of course, with the Western support, the unprecedented unity that we have seen so far, has prevented Kremlin to restore its so-called sphere of influence. However, I think despite the Russian failures that we see in Ukraine, Putin's regime is committed to the agenda and to this agenda, and for this reason it is very important to make sure that the Ukraine has enough support, and in this case, of course, military support is very important, but also when it comes to sanctions, it is very important to make sure that all the gaps are being closed, all the loopholes of the sanctions. So what needs to be done to secure the Black Sea, to make sure that we avoid facing, as you said, Georgia, countries like Georgia becoming another front line? I think until Russia's war against Ukraine, there wasn't, the Western strategic thinking did not prioritize the Black Sea security. Neither NATO nor the US have a Black Sea strategy, which I think needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And we have already seen, since the beginning of the war, there have been some conversations, some discussions already started to elaborate this strategy. We have also seen last June in Madrid summit, the Black Sea has been identified as a strategic area of importance for NATO. And NATO has also expanded its response force and increased the number of high readiness forces. Secondly, I think maintaining NATO force presence in the region would be one of the core areas that will be a main contributing factor to strengthening deterrence in the Black Sea. I would like to also highlight that the importance of making sure that NATO works with regional partnering countries that are not a part of NATO for now, non-NATO member countries, to make sure that the hybrid threats are addressed. As I mentioned, there are various tools, apart from conventional tools, that Russia is deploying in this region. So it is very important to cooperate with non-NATO partnering countries to make sure that their capabilities are raised to address those challenges. The military exercises, we have seen NATO being present in this region, but I think more needs to be done to make sure that there is Georgia, Ukraine increase their interoperability among forces. And finally, I think the core point and the fundamental point is to ensure that Ukraine wins and to make sure that there is, as Maryna mentioned, the just peace, not on Russian terms, the peace that Ukrainians and Ukrainian people deserve to achieve.
Just peace is that. It's for both sides to have justice. Okay. Thank you, Nadia. We have only 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So I don't know if someone, Ambassador, you want to comment, or Neil? Yes, of course.
I just want to quickly pick up on I think, the point about Turkey and its centrality in the Black Sea security. I think really is an important one, and it highlights the need to find a better way to engage Turkey, because I think while it's true that there is no NATO position in the Black Sea on security without Turkey, Turkey is also one of the biggest impediments, I think, to actually building effective deterrence against Russia, because of, on the maritime side especially. And so one of the lessons of the Ukraine war, I think, is the emergence of Ukraine as a major regional military force in its own right. And this is only going to get stronger. So we see a shift in the geopolitical balance in the Black Sea from control of the Straits to the north. And I think that if we're looking to actually contain Russia, strengthening naval capabilities, and Ukraine has shown actually very effectively using asymmetric approaches, it's managed to really damage the Russian Black Sea fleet, keep them offshore, prevent them actually landing forces, and in many ways neutralize it. So I think we could look to actually working with others, Georgia providing similar kinds of asymmetric technologies, but particularly Romania, Bulgaria, and building up Ukraine's naval forces as a way to try and actually get over that problem of the Straits.
Thank you. Ambassador, yes.
Briefly, two points. First of all, I'd like to pick up from one very valid point which was made by Professor Aydin. He was referring to the fact that the Black Sea region is not just about the countries in the region, but there are other actors as well. What I have in mind is that beyond national, individual states, there are some important organizations, regional and not only regional, which have developed activities related to the BSEC, to the Black Sea Black Sea area. And I'm talking about the European Union, which, by the way, has a Black Sea synergy. We talk about the 3C initiative, who's also looking at the Black Sea. We also have the CECP, the Southeastern European Cooperation Process, with an eye on the Black Sea, and also the Central European initiatives, for example. I think that there is room and need there for a real synergy among all these organizations when it comes to dealing with the Black Sea area. Point number one. Point number two, coming back, and I do apologize, I have forgotten, you referred to the civil society. Just to mention that, last Monday, I met in Istanbul both the president and the secretary general of the Black Sea University Network. And we've been discussing exactly about what and how the academia, think tanks, are able to develop and bring forward the idea to the decision makers so as to, better manage, so to say, the BSEC area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They are showing me that it's the end of our discussion. Of course, we could... no. Yes, Mustafa, please.
Very short 2 points. One is, in Black Sea, there are 6 littoral countries 3 of which are NATO members and 2 NATO partners. So it shouldn't be very difficult to organize a focused regional policy of NATO for the Black Sea if we work with the regional NATO countries in the Black Sea. The second is about the European approach. It has been disorganized, unfocused. Even though now it seems that the European countries and the European Union is firmly behind the Ukrainian effort, the EU has never seen the region as a region. It has seen the region either as a part of a big problem, which is countering Russia, or unconnected smaller problems, which is another problem. So EU also has to look into the region as a region whole and provide some future to attract the regional countries. Let me stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you.